preparing live stream.
I'm gonna turn off my video.
Okay, it's processing, it's thinking about it.
I'll keep an eye on the chat. And then I'm gonna let you run this thing. Good luck.
All right. I changed up the slides a little bit. Okay, I think we are all set to go. All right. Hello, everybody, welcome. I'm going to give it just a few more minutes before we start to give any latecomers an opportunity to join. But in the meantime, hello, everybody. My name is Katie. I'm the head of the Transfer Admissions Office here at Accepted Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us today. Excuse me if I clear my throat. I have a little bit of a sore throat today, but today we are going to be talking about the UC transfer admissions and what that looks like, how to write your personal insight questions, all of the above. So welcome. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the chat as we go along, and there will be a Q&A section at the end if you'd like to ask in person using your microphone. So I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So again, welcome everybody. Again, this is the masterclass for the UC transfer admissions. A little bit about Accepted. Accepted Consulting was founded by Kaylin Grace Apple, who is our amazing founder. She is currently doing her PhD in African American and American history at Yale. She started Accepted because she acknowledged that there was a little bit of a disparity between the community college students and their track into higher education. So being a community college transfer student herself, she founded Accepted. So today in our presentation, we're going to be going over a little bit about my personal transfer journey, just to give you guys a little bit of a background from where I'm coming from. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what goes into planning community college coursework when it comes to thinking about transferring from community college to the UCs, since they have specific requirements. Then we're going to talk about the application process, including the UC personal insight questions, because the personal insight questions are a little bit different than your typical college essay application. And then lastly, we're going to be thinking ahead and looking at the things that you should be considering when submitting your applications, and things like scholarships, financial aid funding, and how to select a program for you. So again, hello, my name is Katie. I am the head of the transfer admissions office at Accepted Consulting. I did my community college education at Sacramento City College, where I got my associates to transfer in anthropology. I'm currently a senior at UC Berkeley, where I'm studying anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology. I joined Accepted in January, February of this year, and I've been working with Kaylin and the rest of the Accepted team since then. So a little bit about my background. When I was in high school, I did very, very poorly for a lot of different reasons. I graduated high school with a 2.2 GPA, and I almost didn't graduate high school. I went to summer school and remedial classes my entire high school career. And when I graduated high school, I decided I did not want to apply to colleges. I had absolutely zero ability to go to a college. I didn't have the finances, I didn't have the grades, I didn't have the motivation. So I personally took a gap year before deciding I wanted to give community college a try. Interestingly enough, when it came to community college, I actually got a C and an F my very first semester. And it wasn't until I found anthropology and understood what it meant to study something that you are passionate about that I started doing better in community college. Fast forward a couple of years and I transferred to the top public university in the United States, which is UC Berkeley. So here you can see that outlined, high school to a gap year, community college. Something I forgot to mention is that I did also gain work experience during this time, which is something I put on my application. I spent a lot of time doing volunteer work with museums and doing volunteer archaeological experiences. So that way I could really kind of test the waters and see if it's something I wanted to do. So let's talk about a couple of reasons why community college is an option for a lot of people before we move on. So first and foremost, like I said, I did not have the finances to go to a university straight from high school because of the cost of education. As you can see here on the slide, about 25% of the middle class here in the United States do not go to college because of the cost. Versus the cost of community college on average is about $3,600 a year, which is essentially a fraction of the price of most universities in the US. Another reason why one might choose to go to community college, which is another reason that impacted me, is the grades. If you didn't achieve academic success in high school, or you didn't have the time, something happened in high school, or maybe you have a different learning style, whatever it is that caused you to not achieve that academic success in high school, community college is a great option for people who need that extra time to figure out, how to approach college from their personal learning style. Another thing that is great when it comes to community college is the option to study a variety of different subjects on your own time, on your own schedule, to figure out exactly what it is you want to do. Lastly is the commitment. And I think something I already said is that I was not ready to attend a four-year university. I had no time management skills. I had no study skills. So taking that gap year and going to community college as an option for learning how to be a college student is one of the reasons why I decided to go. In addition, a lot of community colleges have transfer agreement programs between the community college and state schools, such as here in California, the Transfer Admission Guarantee Program, and then the AADT program, which is between community colleges and the CSU system. So now let's talk a little bit about your coursework in community college. So when it comes to transferring, there are certain requirements that you're going to have to meet. And the very first one is your unit requirement. So in every situation, regardless of what university you're transferring to, you're going to have a minimum amount of units, because the point of community college is essentially to get your freshman and sophomore year at your community college before transferring. So you have to meet the same unit requirements that you would have to as a freshman and sophomore at a four-year university. So for the UCC to UC system, that is either 60 semester or 90 quarter unit equivalent. Then the other thing that you're going to need to think about when selecting your classes is the IGETSU, which is the Intersegmental General Education Transfer Curriculum. I think this has seven different areas that outline the general education requirements that you're going to need in order to transfer, and that covers things like quantitative reasoning, biological sciences, social sciences, and then for the UCs specifically, you're going to have to take a foreign language requirement. And then lastly, you also need to consider what your major requirements are going to be. So for whatever major it is that you're going to be going into to get your degree, you're going to have to take your lower division prerequisites. For me, that was taking Anthropology 1, 2, and 3, which is biological anthropology, cultural anthropology, and archaeology, because those are the classes that I would have had to take at UC Berkeley anyways. A great resource that isn't listed on this slide that you should all think about, though, is assist.org, which will tell you which classes that you need for which major and which classes will transfer between your community college and the UCs in that major. So that should help you with planning your coursework. Okay, now that we've covered a little bit of the background, let's talk about the timeline of the application process for the UCs. We are in the last couple of weeks of October, and as I'm sure many of you guys know, the application opens for submission in November and then also closes at the end of November. So we're getting pretty close to the end of the application process. But so let's back it up a little bit. Let's talk about the pre-application. So when you are thinking about applying and you're getting ready to select your programs and you're talking about your classes, the first thing that you need to do is you need to research the programs that you want to go into so you know what the requirements are. It's helpful to discuss what your plans are with a transfer advisor, and I put transfer advisor on this slide very specifically, and I want to emphasize that because the general advisors at your community college might not fully understand what the transfer process looks like. So I advise that you meet with somebody who is specifically trained to assist transfer students. In the pre-application phase, you want to make sure that you are fulfilling all of your general education requirements, your major requirements. And if you haven't yet, making sure that you're tackling any classes that you still need in the upcoming semester. I would also recommend that you log on to the application website and just familiarize yourself with what the application looks like, including all of the different sections. So that way, when you go to fill it out, you have all of the information that you need on hand. Next, we have the application itself. So when it comes to the application, you're going to have certain things on hand. Like I said, the first one is that you're going to need all of your transcripts from all of the colleges that you've attended, regardless of what the grades are, regardless of if you switched community colleges, regardless of if those community colleges are from a different state, or if you went to a four-year university first and then went to community college, you need to send in all of your transcripts. Excuse me. Next, during the application process is you're going to want to start drafting your essays, and I do recommend doing this somewhat early. You don't necessarily have to do it as early as I did. I started in July, and I did not submit my essays until Thanksgiving weekend. But make sure that you are giving yourself enough time to do the brainstorming process, come up with an outline, and then spend time writing and editing. Then you're going to have to revise all of your materials, revise those essays, and make sure that you're doing that with a friend, a consultant, a professor, a family member, somebody who knows you and somebody who has the training to be able to give you the feedback that you'll need to write a good essay. Also, during the application process, do not forget to submit your FAFSA application. That is the free application for federal student aid. Regardless of whether or not you think you're going to receive any financial aid, it's critical that you submit this information because that's where the UCs get your information, not only for financial aid, but also for loans and scholarships. So it's really essential that you fill that out. Then once you have written amazing essays, you've submitted your application and you're confident, the next part is the decisions. Decisions for transfer students in the UC system come sometime in spring. It varies campus to campus, but it will be in kind of like the middle of spring towards late spring. When you finally get your decisions back and you've celebrated and you're super excited, the things that I recommend doing is reviewing your financial aid letter. This is going to help you figure out which campuses are going to be feasible for you to attend, and then also start weighing your decisions carefully, assess the different programs and think about what it is those programs are going to be able to provide for you as you move forward with your education. If you need help making this decision, we also recommend meeting with a transfer advisor or a trusted friend, as well as coming to speak with one of the consultants at Accepted Consulting. So let's talk a little bit about the components of your application. The first thing that I want to point out is the TAG, which is the Transfer Admission Guarantee Program. This is an agreement between the California community colleges and the UCs, and I believe it's all but UC Berkeley, UCLA, and UC San Diego participate in this. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's guaranteed admission to one of the universities, given that you've fulfilled certain requirements. Something that not everybody knows, however, is that you do have to fill out a TAG application and send it to whichever campus it is that you want to submit your TAG to. You can only choose one campus for this. So again, think about which campus it is that you're sending it to and weigh that decision. Next is, again, the application, which is what this whole presentation is about. The UC application, and this is something I did not know that I really want to emphasize, is that it is required for both a regular transfer application regarding, just if you're sending it to all of the universities, as well as your tag application. So you can submit your transfer admission guarantee application, but you also have to submit your regular UC application. It doesn't really impact whether or not that transfer admission guarantee is going to go through, but it does still let the universities know who you are as a person, what your values are, get to know you, as well as provide that financial and background information that they're going to need to assess in terms of financial aid and scholarships. Another thing I want to point out is that this is one application that goes to all of the campuses that you choose to send it to. So when it comes to writing your essays, keep in mind that you do not want to be highlighting certain aspects of other schools. If you're sending it to, say, UCLA and UC Berkeley, if you're name dropping a professor at UCLA, the people at Berkeley might be a little confused about why you're doing that. Next is transcripts. Again, attach your transcripts from each institution. Read the fine print when it comes to this section, because they might have certain stipulations or certain requirements depending on if you're an in-state or out-of-state student. And then lastly is the essays, the UC personal insight questions. With the UC personal insight questions, they have one required prompt and then 3 prompts that you get to choose out of 7. And that is what we are going to start talking about next. So in this slide, I left this in this presentation, personal statements versus personal insight questions, because many of us as transfer students are applying to more than just the UCs. And I want to point out that a personal statement is a 500 to 1,000 word essay. It's a longer essay. It's typically for private and out-of-state institutions, and it has a different format than the personal insight questions. That's not to say that you can't write about similar things for personal statement and the personal insight questions, but I want you to keep that in mind when you're writing your application so you can strategize how to approach them. So that way you're not spending a lot of time writing and rewriting all of your essays. Then for the personal insight questions, it's 4 short essays, a max of 350 words for each prompt. Okay. Now, when we're actually talking about writing a personal insight question, I want to put this little kind of a structure to the personal insight question here, because again, it's a little bit different than a personal statement. So the first thing that you have to do, especially with an essay that is only 350 words, is you really have to capture the attention of the people who are reading your essay. So start your essays with some kind of hook or personal anecdote that draws the reader in and starts to set up the narrative that you're going to be developing about yourself. Use that hook and personal anecdote to make some kind of connection to your major or area of study. And then you're going to transition into having a background and a discussion about what that experience was like, why it was impactful, and how it connects to your major. And then the reflection part is where you get to say, here's what I learned, here are the skills that I developed, and how it's going to be useful to me as a student moving forward. So now we kind of have the structure of a personal insight question in our head. Let's start talking about what the prompts look like. So here's the required prompt. Please describe how you prepared for your intended major, including your readiness to succeed once you've transferred to your new university. And this prompt is really important to talk about because it seems direct, but it's actually very open-ended. And something that I see a lot of students doing while writing this essay is writing what I call the resume essay, where they take all of the different things that they've done that theoretically makes them a good student and listed it in paragraph form. And that's not necessarily what the UCs are asking for, because they can see all of that information on your transcripts and in your extracurriculars, activities, and awards section. What they're really asking in this prompt is, tell us what is important to you and why it's important to you. They want to know who you are as a person. They want to know how you think, how you respond to certain situations. And the way you're going to do that is through showing rather than telling. So you're going to, again, develop a narrative, get those creative writing juices flowing, and use some kind of personal anecdote as a tool to highlight the parts of your personality that you really want the UCs to know about you. Next, we have the other prompts. Again, there are 7 prompts from which you have to select 3. And the themes of those prompts have to do with leadership, creativity, talents, and skills, a significant challenge that you faced, an educational opportunity or an educational barrier, community development, and then there's one really open-ended prompt. So I just wanted to touch on each one of these lightly to kind of talk about the different things that you can discuss within each prompt. So when it comes to leadership, again, when it comes to the personal insight questions, you can really discuss anything in your life as long as you're viewing it through the perspective of the prompt and making sure you're answering it. So leadership doesn't necessarily have to be a time in which you had an official role, like you were a manager at a store or you were the president of a club. It can really be in any sense that you have stepped into a unofficial role or an official role where you've had to take on responsibility and lead a certain aspect of your life. So maybe you were in charge of tutoring your younger siblings. Maybe you did have a job and you weren't necessarily a manager, but you took on a specific project. Or maybe you were the leader of a project at your community college. Those are all examples that you can definitely draw on, and it does not have to be official in any way, shape, or form. Then is the creativity prompt. They're going to ask you to discuss how you express your creative side. Again, these prompts are very open-ended, so you can really approach this from any perspective that you want, as long as you're using it, again, to illustrate the ways in which you're creative, connecting that and also connecting that back to your academics and how creativity has been important to you in terms of the skills that you've learned and the growth that you've experienced and how that's going to be helpful in your academics. For me, for example, I discussed wearing vintage clothing and the way that I loved putting together a vintage outfit, but then also realizing that the more I dressed in vintage and the more I became involved in the community and the more research I did on vintage clothing, that I had a huge environmentalism and sustainability aspect to it that I didn't know before. So in that aspect, I was talking about creativity, but using it as a vehicle to discuss how I'm capable of research, how I'm capable of learning new things and applying things like environmentalism and sustainability and community to my everyday life, as well as my academics. Next is talking about a talent or a skill that you've been able to develop. For me personally, I use this prompt as an opportunity to talk about something that was a challenge in my life, but through the perspective that this was a talent or a skill that I was capable of developing. So it can be anything. It could be an actual, like, I learned how to play the guitar. That is definitely a talent or a skill. But it can also be softer skills like active listening, or for me, I chose resourcefulness and determination as the skills that I learned to develop. Next is a significant challenge that you face. And I know that this may sound a little similar to an educational barrier, but significant challenge is broader than an educational barrier, and it has anything in your life that has been a challenge. So things like illnesses in the family, perhaps a death in the family, economic impact, or really anything that has been a disruption to your life. Personally, I discussed the death of my father, and the reason why I chose to discuss that is because it was really important to contextualizing my application and the reasons why I didn't do well in high school and the reason why I decided to go to community college. For educational opportunity or barrier, in this one, you have the option of discussing the time that you took advantage of an opportunity. And again, using that as a way to discuss the skills and the growth that you've been able to gain through your educational experiences. And then also there's the option of addressing the other part of the question, which is the educational barrier, which again sounds like a significant challenge, but you want to make sure that this one is specific to your education and anything that's been disruptive or impactful to your education. Then there's the community development aspect. Again, another very open-ended question, but anything that revolves around community. And again, I want to stress that most of these prompts don't have to be the way you respond to them. It doesn't have to be about something that was very official. It could be about the small things in your life, as long as it's told through your own unique perspective. So when it comes to community development, it doesn't have to be that you were a part of a big community development project or you volunteered a lot within your community, but it can even be smaller and more insular than that, such as talking about a club that you joined at your community college campus, or talking about the way that your family fits into the community of your neighborhood, or even just talking about your family as a community. So really, as long as you're taking it through the lens of community, any of these experiences are applicable. Then there's the last prompt on the UC PIQs, and this one is essentially, is there anything else about yourself that you haven't had the chance to tell us that you want to tell us? Typically, this prompt is rather difficult to answer, and When it comes to answering this prompt, I would highly encourage anybody who's thinking about writing it to write a response, read that response, and ask yourself if it could answer any of the other prompts in the UC PIQs. Because with the open-ended prompt, if they see you answering one of the other prompts in this one, they're going to be asking why you didn't choose to use this to answer the other prompts that it fits. So it has to be coming from a very unique perspective. It has to be something completely new, and that's very, very difficult to do. So if you want to try answering it, I say go for it, but then take that moment to reflect, look back at your essays, and ask yourself whether or not it could answer one of the other prompts. So some of the important takeaways that I want you guys to think about when writing your essays is that I think something I've been touching on throughout all of, talking about all of the different prompts, is that you should be writing from your unique perspective. It does not necessarily have to be a particularly unique experience or a particularly unique topic, but it does have to come from your perspective, which is the uniqueness. When you're writing your essays, you really want to make sure and assessing that each sentence has a purpose and that each sentence sounds like only you could have written it. So, writing a generic essay or following a generic format when these readers are reading hundreds of essays a day is going to make your essay not stand out. So taking that unique perspective and really taking the opportunity to develop a narrative about who you are as a person and how you think is very important. In the second bullet point, highlighting important aspects of your personality, highlighting the aspects of your personality and also thinking about how you can convey the values that you hold to the universities through your writing. And then lastly, you need to be showing instead of telling. So like I said, the resume essay where you list all of the things that you've done, that's telling them that you're a good student rather than showing them. And it's a much more compelling essay. It's much more fun to read if you can use that creative writing process to develop that narrative to illustrate who you are as a person so that I get the chance to see and hear and feel what it is that you are thinking and going through as a student on your educational journey. So let's talk about some do's and don'ts. Now that you're thinking about what kinds of prompts you want to answer, you have some ideas, you're writing your outlines. The first thing that you need to do is give yourself plenty of time to prepare. Writing these essays can be a difficult thing to do. And for me, I wrote my essays and then I scrapped them and then I rewrote them and then I changed my mind. So make sure that you're giving yourself plenty of time to think about how you want to answer them and then actually writing them. Something you don't want to do is to leave your application to the last minute. This also includes all other aspects of your application because filling out the different sections of the UC application does take time. You're going to have background information and financial information and your official transcripts from your schools. So make sure that you're not leaving filling out the application to the last minute. Something you do want to do is create a strategy. So think about how you're going to approach your essays, maybe develop a timeline for when you're going to write certain essays. You can even develop a strategy on how to utilize the same topic for maybe the UC PIQs as well as a personal statement so that you're not having to redo your work over and over again, but have some kind of a guideline to help you through this process. Another do is to seek a proofreader, or at the very least, if you don't have anybody to proofread your essays or you don't have the time, read your essays out loud to yourself, because this is going to give you the opportunity to catch things like sentence flow issues, grammar issues, maybe repetitiveness. It always helps to read back your writing out loud, because when you're reading your own writing over and over in your head, you start to not be able to catch those little things and mistakes that might exist. Some other don'ts, again, don't submit work you haven't proofed. Make sure somebody is reading your essay or you're at least reading it out loud to yourself. I would also recommend taking a step away from your essays. Close your computer, go watch some TV, have a good night's sleep and come back to it with fresh eyes and a new perspective, because you might catch things that you didn't otherwise. And again, that's where having plenty of time comes into play. And then lastly, do not submit generic essays. Submitting a generic essay is the #1 way for an admissions reader to not know who you are. using the personal insight questions to convey your personality is super important, because what it does is it takes all of this information that is like numbers and words on a page, and it contextualizes all of that stuff into the narrative of your life and who you are. I have this little section in here so that Kaylin and I would have the opportunity to talk about why we each chose UCLA and UC Berkeley and talking about our selection of programs, but I think Kaylin is not speaking today, so I'm just going to discuss why I chose Berkeley, if that's okay with you guys. Some factors that I took into consideration when I got into UC Berkeley was again the financial aid package, as well as other things that were really important to me when it came to geography. So UC Berkeley did offer me the best financial aid package out of the other universities that I got into. So it was the most financially accessible to me. But also I chose UC Berkeley for its proximity to my mother's house. I have some personal family issues that make it so that I want to be nearby to my family. So it was far enough away from home that it wasn't in my mom's hometown, but it was close enough that I could go home if I needed to. Another really, really important reason why I chose Berkeley was the department that I was going to be going into. When I sat down and looked at all of the UCs and was trying to decide which programs I wanted to apply to, I took a look at the department, their labs, the resources that they had available to them, like the libraries. I looked at the faculty members and their areas of interest and their research. And I narrowed down which schools I wanted to apply to by looking at who it was I was going to be learning from and the opportunity to do things like research and work closely with professors who are like, leaders in the field of anthropology and archaeology. So that was a huge determining factor for me. That's really the three reasons, yeah. Okay, so now that you guys have thought about your essays, you've written great essays, you've submitted your application, let's start thinking ahead. And I know that as transfer students, we're constantly thinking ahead, but there are three really important things that I want you guys to keep in mind as you're transitioning from community college to the UCs. The first one is scholarships. And this is something that not a lot of people talk about when it comes to applying to the UCs, but you need to be looking for scholarships very early. Many of the deadlines for scholarships are soon after transfer acceptances are released. And the issue here is that scholarships are sometimes university specific. So if you find out that you got into UC Berkeley and you really want to go there and there's a scholarship specific to Berkeley that you really want to apply to, but the deadline is in a week. Me personally, I didn't find out about a lot of those deadlines because I hadn't done the research. So it's a really good idea to take a look at what kinds of scholarships exist for which campuses in preparation for knowing when those deadlines are so that you can put together an application for those scholarships. The next thing is review. And I'm not talking about reviewing your essays, I'm talking about reviewing your community college education. So really just don't be afraid to review your previous coursework in preparation for going into your upper division units or your upper division coursework at your transfer school. For me personally, it had been like a year and a half since I had taken cultural anthropology when I got to UC Berkeley. So when I was in class and we were building off of the foundations of a cultural anthropology class, I felt a little bit behind. And I spent some time catching up during the semester by going back to my community college coursework and looking up key terms, rereading my notes, and highlighting, just hitting the highlights of what it is I thought I would need. I spent a lot of time doing this again during the semester, and that was kind of a stressful process for me. So if you could use the summer between community college and going to your transfer school to kind of review and refresh the information that you've been learning, I say go for it. The next is community. Now, transferring from a community college to a big university can be a little bit scary in terms of community and finding friends and finding belonging. So I recommend that people start finding their communities during the summers after they've received their application decisions. Look for Facebook groups, find other people in your major at your university on Instagram and reach out to them. You can also look for university-sponsored events, community building events, such as like transfer student orientation, maybe looking at the transfer centers at those universities to see if they are hosting anything. And then also taking a look at the clubs that might interest you. I personally joined the Anthropology Club at Berkeley, and that was one of the things, one of the places where I found community. All right, so that just about wraps up, I think, everything I wanted to say about the application and the transfer process and PIQs. Real quick before we move into the Q&A section, I just want to again reintroduce our transfer admissions team. We have Kaylin, the founder of our little company here, Kaylin Grace Apple, and then again, there's me. In terms of our services, we offer consultations for community college students. We do document reviews, one-on-one consultations, and we also offer full application support. So if you want multiple rounds of revision or you need to really work through your application with us, that is an option. We also have Accepted Society, where we offer a host of events, such as accountability workshops multiple times a week, networking nights, mentorship calls, and Accepted Society is open to everybody at any stage in their educational journey, from community college to PhDs. And then again, we also offer full application review with multiple consultations and multiple rounds of reviews. So just keep those in mind. And now we are going to move into the Q&A section. Thank you guys for sticking around. And there's also a discount code here for you for 5% off of your consultations in the future. So now the chat is open. Feel free to also unmute yourself and ask any questions that you might have.
Katie, one of the questions or things that came up in the chat over on YouTube was asking about how perhaps, I'm going to change this into a question structure, but perhaps how do you prepare for wanting to get involved in student orgs, specifically like business clubs that are notoriously selective, especially as a transfer student?
That's a good question. And my advice would be networking. These clubs have tabling events where you can go and like, for example, at Berkeley, we have Sproul Plaza. Let me stop sharing real quick. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, it's on a different screen. There we go. Okay. At Sproul Plaza, we have tabling events where people advertise their clubs. So starting there, going and getting to know the people who are tabling, who are in the clubs. A lot of them also have application processes, so taking your experience of applying to the universities and applying that to your applications for these clubs. They also have networking and event nights where you can go and talk to them and get to know them. So it's a lot about networking. It's a lot about getting to know the people there, and use that wonderful transfer personality that I know you guys have. Kaylin, do you have any advice on this? Because I've never applied to one of the business clubs.
So if one of your reasons for applying to certain schools is going to be their student organizations, obviously the UC PIQs are going to ask you to talk very broadly, so you're not going to mention the specific student orgs. However, you can discuss that is something that is important to you in your application. And then when you get there and you're going through the application process or going through the recruitment process, I personally went through the recruitment process for one of the other professional fraternities. It was a co-ed fraternity at UCLA for law. And they didn't necessarily have an application process, but they had a very selective interview process. And so if you want help preparing for those types of interviews, we also do interview prep here at Accepted, but it's really about making sure that when you go into those student meetings that you're presenting yourself obviously professionally, but also as someone who's going to stand out, because they can be very competitive and very selective. So that's kind of my general advice, is that there's not usually an application per se, especially for a lot of the professional frats. However, there is a very selective kind of recruitment process.
Mm-hmm. Some of the ones at Berkeley do actually have a formal application you have to fill out.
Yeah.
But yes, we do, like Kaylin said, we offer interview prep. A question from the Zoom chat: does having a surplus of credits and electives from a previous major necessarily look bad? Well, when you're going from a community college to a UC, first of all, they have a credit, like a unit cap. So you can only transfer in with that maximum 60 semester or 90. So it doesn't really matter how many units you're taking at your community college because they're not all going to transfer. Additionally, if you change your major and you have a bunch of electives and other things from a different major, that's okay. It's reflected in your transcript. And if it's something that is really important to you that you want to talk about, you can also address that either in your essays or also in the additional comments section. I would be very careful about how you use your additional comment section though, because it is not an opportunity to write another essay, and writing another essay in that section will look bad. So be very concise about how you explain it in the additional comment section if you feel like it's necessary. But no, it doesn't necessarily look bad.
Also, depending on how it is that you did in those classes, it could actually work in your favor, depending on how it's being read. Because the admissions committee is going to look at the whole application very holistically.
Yes. And if you choose to write about it in your essays, you could even take it from the perspective of, I switched my major for these reasons. However, I still learned these skills that are going to be applicable to this major as well as like a future career, if that's a perspective you want to take.
We also got another question asking thoughts on the theory of Berkeley Bubbles.
I think it depends, depending on who you're talking to, for a variety of reasons. I think from my perspective, I'm an older student who grew up in a different area, has a different educational background, is from a lower socioeconomic status. And I'm also in the anthropology department, which is a social science. And we look critically at the way that, we learn information, looks critically at our world and things like that. So I have that perspective, but somebody else who doesn't have that perspective might answer that question differently. One thing that I have noticed though is that I refer to it as the Berkeley Bubble, which is I am surrounded by people who, if they don't necessarily think like me or have the similar opinions as me, they still we can still have educated discussions. But then when I leave my Berkeley bubble and I go somewhere else and I hear the way people think and talk, it's a little, I wouldn't say shocking, but it brings me back to earth, I suppose. Kaylin and Chanel, do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think that happens in any educational institution. Because I spend 5 days a week on campus talking to my professors and other students. So when I have the opportunity to be in a different cultural area, it's a clash of cultures.
Yeah, academic culture is very different. Another question was, I don't know how I would urge you to answer this question, but what is the ethnic makeup of Haas?
The true answer is I do not know.
So the general answer is, if you really want to know, you can look at their stats. If you're talking about Haas School of Business for the business major, that's a different question than Haas Business MBA, in which case the gender makeup is significantly leaning in the direction of male, cis male. However, in terms of ethnic makeup, Haas is usually known for being quite quote unquote diverse. Definitely more than some of the other business programs, for example, like Duke or Stanford. So it varies, but Berkeley is generally known for being relatively, obviously it can always improve.
Yeah. And I would also urge you to look not only at the Haas Business School, but also just the demographic makeup of Berkeley in general, because in general, as an entire campus, Berkeley is again more diverse than other universities, which isn't saying much, but it's true. So, and I know quite a few women who are in the Haas Business School who are transfers. So,
okay. Yeah, there's a growing number of women going into the business sector, especially within universities. And it also depends on which business school you're talking about. Like the gender makeup between different business schools also varies depending on the reputation of that particular school. and just general offerings and access and variety of things. But okay, somebody said, is Latinx, Mexican, Chicano culture represented at Berkeley? Well represented at Berkeley.
Well, personally, I think when it comes to types of representation, it matters who you like follow on social media and what you seek out personally. So I follow a lot of the like cultural development centers and things like that at Berkeley, and they advertise a lot of events for different, I guess I would say like ethnic groups. That's not quite the right phrasing, but so we do have like a Native American, like a Native American center. We have a Latinx center, and I follow, you know, all the people who develop the events for that. So from my perspective, they have opportunities for that representation, but, you know, again, it depends on what you're seeking out personally.
So there was we're not going to entirely get into this. They said, please do not use the phrase Latinx. I know for some, particularly, I have seen it particularly among men who do not like the use of the phrase. However, it is what is used in our institutions. So I apologize for using that phrase, but we also is linguistic imperialism. Okay, well, we are happy to change up the language as you see fit. If you could send us any information as to the language that we should be using in these forums, then we would be happy to discuss it.
Do we have any further questions about the application, about your personal insight questions, or anything else we can address about that aspect of our presentation? Caitlin, do you want to go over why you chose to go to UCLA, and also Chanel, you're welcome to add your input about UCLA.
There were a couple different reasons I went to UCLA. One was the financial. Staying in state was definitely a lot less expensive than going out of state, which is what I was looking at. I applied to a lot of private and public universities outside of, and the other reason was the history department. The history department had the professors that I really wanted to work with. I also liked that there was the optional honors thesis, and that was something that was going to be really important to me as somebody that really wanted to go to graduate school in the future or law school. And it was because they also had an African American studies department. I really wanted to make sure that I was either at a school I wanted it to be at a school that had an African American studies department, hopefully a gender studies department, as well as a law school. That was another aspect of things that I really wanted out of a program. And then also other things about like the guarantee for housing as a transfer student. UCLA has the #1 like dining halls and all of those things. So access to the types of resources that I wanted was another reason.
And I would also mention if things like transfer housing are really important, because they are important for things like community development. That's something to look into, because Berkeley does not offer guaranteed housing for anybody but first-year students, because the Bay Area's housing issue is severely impacted. So if that's important to you, then I would take that into consideration. Chanel, would you like to share your UCLA experience?
Of course. So I transferred from San Diego Mesa Community College. My top 2 choices by the time decisions came out were essentially UCLA and UCSD. And I think the biggest factor was their sociology programs and why I leaned towards UCLA. UCLA's sociology department is like known to be one of the best in the country, and so I'd be learning from leading academics in their field. And then Again, housing was also a great factor, knowing that I would be on campus living that university life and really being immersed in that culture was a big factor, as I had previously left Penn State, a four-year institution, to come back home to community college. I really wanted to get into that atmosphere again. And then proximity to home, I think it was also another big thing, is like I wanted to be closer to home, but even though UCSD was aka home for me, it was nice to have that distance, but also to know that I can come home anytime I needed to or wanted to, just because family is a big deal for me. And then, like, I guess, like as Kaylin said, certain aspects of my career that I wanted to go look into, like law. It was a big bonus to have a law school right on campus, knowing that one of my classes is actually at Dodd Hall, which is right next to the law school, which is really cool to experience. And then yeah, I think also the guidance into whatever career path. It's very prevalent here, at least within the sociology department. So yeah, it's kind of my main reasons why I chose UCLA.
We got a question for Chanel, actually, if you tapped to UCLA.
I did not tap to UCLA. By the time I found out about TAP and like the honors program within my community college, keep in mind that I was only at community for about a year and a half. I wasn't there for 2 years. That was because I had courses built up from other institutions. So it kind of cut my time at community short. So I didn't have the time to really develop or take all the credits in the community service that was necessary to tap into UCLA. But I do know a lot of people who have and are now part of the honors program here.
Another thing that I forgot to mention about choosing UC Berkeley over other universities was my major, because I intend on, doing and performing research and doing archaeology. And some of the universities in the UC system offer an archaeology specific degree. But I wanted to do specifically anthropology because it was a bit more flexible. And if I wanted to like change which area of anthropology to focus on, I could. So if there's like a particular degree that you're thinking about, looking at those programs is important. I also saw somebody ask, can we read your essays? I never send out my essays in print form to anybody to avoid plagiarism as much as possible, but they are available in video form on my YouTube channel. Oh, there's another Zoom question. Katie, do you know when you'll have office hours available next? I have to check my schedule. I think that my schedule on the website is outdated, so I will check those and update it as soon as possible.
We also will be sending out a weekly newsletter for Accepted. So anybody that is interested about knowing about upcoming events for Accepted Society, office hours, master classes, those types of things, be sure to add yourself to the mailing list on the website. So that way you can be notified when we have upcoming events.
Well, if there are any last questions, I'm happy to answer them, but otherwise I think we are going to start wrapping up our presentation. Thank you everybody who joined the Zoom, and thank you everybody watching over on YouTube. It was great to have you guys. And you can also always contact us at Accepted Consulting. There's a contact page on the website. And you can also send me an email, katie@acceptedconsulting.com, if you have any questions about transferring. All right.